Ask yourself, what are the structures, the processes, the rules, the law, the practices that make this result, that ensure that this result keeps happening and that it's not going to change? What laws exist, what norms exist that keeps this in place?
Past 8, so it is time to start. Welcome everybody. Welcome at this special lecture. I'm Rob van Duin, Studium Generale, but actually we didn't organize this lecture, or at least not alone. We have to thank Daniel Wenzel for that, a student who studied here he's doing a master's now in the UK, but he studied here and during his study he was active at the In-Between. And he was very inspired by different speakers that he found online, and Nora Wilhelm was one of them. So he took the initiative to invite her to Maastricht. And he also took the initiative to get these interesting partners together. So Sustainable UM 2030, very important in organization within the UM to strive for a sustainable UM. The In-Between, Studium Generale and Studio Europa Maastricht. And from Studio Europa Maastricht, so Maastricht Working on Europe, there's also an interview online that you can visit. And important to remember that tomorrow Nora Wilhelm will, in a somehow smaller setting, also be the guest at the In-Between. So if you like what you hear tonight and you have some time over tomorrow, don't forget to make a reservation for the evening tomorrow at the In-Between. But to tell you more about the evening, the setup, that's my job. So Nora Wilhelm is going to talk for about 45 minutes. And then we have Teun Dekker, the moderator, who will introduce 3 guests from our university who will react to what Nora Wilhelm has said. And also, of course, there's lots of time then for interaction with the audience. But first, Teun Dekker to introduce the evening. Teun.
Thank you, and thank you for asking me, especially Daniel. Thank you for taking the initiative. I've always thought that, determined students can change the world. Indeed, they're the only thing that ever has. And the fact that we're all here today is proof again of that theory. We human beings, we have this amazing thing. We live together in societies. We can organize, we can coordinate our actions through all kinds of social processes, and in that way work together, develop technology, develop systems and institutions, develop a society. And that is an amazing power. It enables us to make life on Earth a little bit nicer. It has built cathedrals, it has created institutions and cultures, it has developed science and art and commerce. And at the same time, we're also realizing that that same power to work together has a destructive side. Just as much as it has created, it also seems to be destroying. It has enabled us to do enormous damage to this planet that we live on. And so, when we reflect on that power that we have as human beings to work together, we must find a way of undoing this damage, of fixing the problems that we have created through our collaboration. And that means that we must think of new ways of organizing that collaboration, new ways of governing how we interact with ourselves, with each other, with our societies, and most importantly, with nature. We need to have new ways of getting everybody's input, new forms of democracy. Because only if we can find new ways of living together, new ways of cooperating socially, will we be able to make the changes that are necessary to not blow up this, this solitary spaceship that is roaming around the universe. And I'm delighted that we have with us today somebody who has some ideas about how different forms of social cooperation might enable us to work together in ways that are more sustainable and that will enable us to make the changes that are necessary to undo the damage that we have done to the world. Nora Wilhelm is a social innovator, an entrepreneur, and a researcher who hails from Switzerland, which of course is a country that has very many interesting ideas about democracy and many fabulously rich democratic practices that I'm really hoping we will hear more about. Right from the start, she had a very active role in the European Youth Parliament, clearly a belief in democracy, but also having taken a lot more direct action, founding, for example, an NGO called Collaboratio Helvetica, that she's since moved on from, and now working on Well Change, an NGO that seeks to use art to pioneer new forms of social change. For this, she has received many honors from UNESCO, from Forbes 30 Under 30, and even the Dalai Lama Fellowship. She's given a range of well-regarded TED Talks, and we're just so happy that you're here with us on this cold and dark Monday night. Without further ado, Nora Wilhelm.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this lovely introduction. The expectations are high now, I'm sure. There's a number of things that are really surprising for me being here tonight. First of all, I did not expect this room to be a church, in fact. And I also am very surprised at how many of you showed up, given that it is past 8 p.m. I was telling everybody before, I cannot believe in Switzerland, university events, tendentially, the last you can start is 6 p.m. Everyone goes to bed after that, or to party, I don't know, whichever way you choose to go. So I'm really honored that you all decided to spend your time here tonight, and I hope that it will be valuable. And in my work, we often go by something called the law of 2 feet, which refers to your 2 feet or your own. So if what I'm sharing here is not a good use of your time, feel free to just leave us and spend your time in a way that's better for you personally. All right, let's get going. I last week was invited to hold a speech at an event of a foundation in Switzerland that celebrates solutions for climate challenges. This year the topic was food systems change, and they were selecting a number of people who had innovative proposals, and they were kind of competing to get prize money, 100,000 euros, let's say. And they recruited me to give a talk at the beginning of this evening, and they said, look, you have 10 minutes, we want it to be inspiring, we want it to be uplifting, go ahead and can you do that? And when I signed up for that, I think it was probably 6 months ago, I was like, sure, you know. And then the world happened. And last week I didn't feel like standing on a stage and pretending like everything was well and talking about something uplifting and the visions for the future, when at least my internal reality at the moment is very much being in touch with the pain of what's unfolding across the globe. And so I was sitting with myself in these slides and thinking, what am I going to do? I said I was going to do the speech. It's supposed to be uplifting. I cannot stand on this stage and kind of, ruin the evening for everybody talking about how a terrible turn everything has taken. So what is it that I can say that is still authentic to how I really feel? And I came back to this sense that it's in the darkest of times that each of us standing up and daring to shine whatever light we carry, whatever hope, whatever vision, whatever contribution we want to make, that is all the more important and makes all the more difference. So that's what I spoke about. And I spoke about, and I want to bring this up today also because I think it's really relevant, a model that keeps helping me whenever I feel like, okay, I'm about to lose hope, I'm about to, fall into depression at the state of the world, or I'm about to lose connection with where we really are. This model really helps me get that back. So it's a model that invites us to be completely cognizant and aware of the present reality. So to not deny how things are right now, to not deny that they may be hard, how I may be feeling about them, or the statistics and the facts and the realities of the situation. But also to not lose touch with the future potential, So if I move a bit away from this, I imagine it as being like having one foot in the present reality where we are right now, and really facing that and really honoring that, but also with my other foot remaining connected to where I know we can go, what I know humans have been capable of in the past and may be capable of again. And kind of standing firmly in connection with those two poles is something that Peter Senge calls the creative tension. Another way to think about it is that my feet are firmly anchored in reality and in the way things truly are, and my head is in the clouds with my visions and potentials and dreams. And the thing is, if I'm only with how things are today, if I'm only anchored in the present reality, I risk to become cynical, right? I risk to become depressed, detached, unable to move, unable to contribute. And if I'm only connected to what could be, to my dreams, to what I think is possible, to my hopes, then I quickly become a little bit of an irrelevant idealist, something I've been called often, perhaps sometimes with some truth. But if we are not able to connect back to reality, we also are unable to make change. So at the end of the day, being a change maker, a leader, somebody who tries to make things better or different according to certain values, is somebody who stands firmly and fully in that creative tension. And that can be a hard thing to do, because it can pull you in different directions, but to still remain in that creative tension. I cannot really say, I often get asked, how did you, end up doing the work that you do? What happened to you? Were your parents somehow, already in this field? Did they kind of push you to do things? I'm like, no, not really. All I can say is that I, since a very young age, have been very connected to this sense of future potential in some way or form. And I recently was clearing out old things from the cellar, as one does, and I found a funny example of this. When I was in primary school, probably fifth grade, I don't know, what are you in fifth grade, maybe 10 or 9 or 8, whatever, and we had learned about the Vikings, right? And what they taught us about the Vikings, things we long now know have been disproven and were not true, they taught us that the boys' Vikings learned to shoot arrows and learned to fight, and the girl Vikings, they learned to cook and take care of things that the families need. We know now that this was just our projection onto the past, that this was not necessarily accurate, but I found this essay that I wrote at this, whatever this age was, 9 or something, and it's like a baby feminist essay. It's like, I cannot believe that also the girl Vikings, they should be able to shoot arrows and we are perfectly capable. So somehow, even as a child, I had this connection to somehow it must be different. Somehow we must be able to do better than this. I cannot accept that this is true. And that probably made me an annoying teenager at times for my parents and people who had to supervise me, always challenging the status quo, but it definitely led me to where I am today. The other big thing that happened for me is that when I was on exchange, I was 16 years old and I went on student exchange to Canada. And I spent all my time in the library reading tons of books in English, all sorts of books. And one day, there was the wife of Romeo Dallaire, now ex-wife, I believe, and he was the head of the Blue Helmets during the Rwanda genocide. Some topic that's relevant, again, today for sad reasons. So for those of you who don't know the history, there was many terrible things happened in Rwanda in 1994, but there was one specific moment where the UN had thousands of people sheltered in a specific venue, and he was given the order to not protect them. So he was given the order to let those people be killed by the genocide that was unfolding. And yeah, he had such bad PTSD that day that he couldn't come himself, and his wife actually came, now ex-wife. And I just remember sitting in this lecture hall, in this library, in random little high school in Ontario, and thinking, what the hell? How is this possible? How is this something that is a part of humanity, something that happened and that I have no knowledge of? And that, doesn't seem to be something that, at least back home, were concerning many people. The other thing that I found out was deforestation in the Amazon. It was the first time I saw these terrible pictures of all the zones that have been completely, deforested. And it was also the first time that I saw what happens behind the closed doors of slaughterhouses. It's also a nasty reality if you've never faced that. So for me, that was my wake-up call. And maybe that's something you can ask yourself, when was your wake-up call? What happened in your journey? What was the moment when you were like, oh wait, something's not right, or I want to contribute to something being different. What was the cause? What was the impulse or the person that spoke to you that suddenly made something maybe shift a little bit, that ended the whole trajectory, or shift a lot? In my case, it definitely burst the whole kind of idyllic childhood bubble that I had grown up in sheltered Switzerland. So that is part of my answer as to, why I'm here today, why I'm doing this work, and what moves me. But what I came here to share is where this has led me, right? So this is more for context, and also because tomorrow night we will talk more about what does it mean to be a leader today, and how can I shape a career, a path, or have the impact that I wish to have. So I thought I'd share a little bit of my story today, but the focus for the remainder of the evening is on what is actually the current situation, and what does systems change and related tools give us as hope for the future. So what's actually the current situation, especially in quote-unquote developed countries like the Netherlands? Some of you have probably seen this before. It's the SDGs, but with, like a red, orange, green light system. As you can see, collectively you've achieved one SDG, or it's on track to be achieved by 2030, and all the others are, not so good. And what I find even more interesting than this chart, so becoming aware that even countries that we somehow think, at least in Switzerland, we think Switzerland is sustainable, and I can tell you the Swiss chart looks much the same. So not only that, but we are terrible at something called the spillover. So the spillover kind of index or rank measures how much a country from our footprint that we are responsible for through our consumptions, through the things that we purchase from elsewhere and so on, or the flights that we take, whatever the case may be, is actually causing damage elsewhere, or is actually showing up in other parts of the world. So I sometimes say the smog in Beijing is actually made in Switzerland. And in a way you could say it's made in the Netherlands also, because I found out that the Netherlands is 6th last. So the 6th worst country in the whole world when it comes to the spillover index. And Switzerland is like the 8th worst or something. So I'm not over here claiming we're in any better. Huh? But just to become aware that not only, at least in Switzerland, we have this picture that we live in, a sustainable country, and our water is clean, and we have the glaciers, I don't know for how long, and we can swim in these waters, and we recycle, and so we must be sustainable, right? And then you look at the reality. And then on the other hand, to really acknowledge that the footprint that we have has dire consequences for other people. And we will not be the first, to flee from a flood or drought or to run out of water. But we are amongst the leading countries in the world responsible for other people facing this fate. So that's something that doesn't sit well with me, and that I would like to contribute to changing. The SDGs, I think, are better represented like this, because it puts kind of the emphasis on acknowledging that they are not all made equal. It's not like we can only focus on innovation and economy, and that is going to save us all. No, we need to take care of our biosphere. Without our biosphere, there is no society, and without our society, there is no economy. So I think this sets our priorities a little bit back to where they should be. And I don't think I need to explain to you in this lecture hall or church of today where we are right now, right? That's also not the point. I'm not a climate scientist. We also know that inequality keeps rising globally, even though we thought the country would be seen at some point that there would be more equity, and that's not the case. And while some people plan their exit from planet Earth and think which other planet they could colonize to make a nice life for themselves, the fact remains that for 99.9% of us, this is the one planet we have. It's planet 1, planet A, the only one, that we will see in our lifetime, and certainly in the lifetime of our descendants, if we choose to have any. And meanwhile, we know all this, right? So one of the titles we gave to tonight is New Ways from Knowing to Doing. Because it's not like we don't know. It's not like we are lacking facts. It's not like we are lacking data. Everybody knows by now, right? Our politicians know. People across the world know. And still, this is what our politics and that kind of the decision makers who should be solving those issues, what they look like. It's a sculpture that you can find in Berlin. It's actually on the floor. It's a puddle. And it just highlights, it's called Follow the Leaders. And it highlights how the sea levels are rising around all of these bold, old white men. So my question is how can it be that we are not achieving the results that we want and need? How is it possible? There's more people than ever who want to make a change. There's more talk than ever of, sustainable business, change in democracy, people who are really engaged and activism. There's more awareness than ever. There's more information than ever. So what is the problem? What is the problem? And this was really the question that I sat with. And in my time as an activist, as somebody who was very, focused on democracy, engaging young people, engaging more diverse voices in decision-making spaces, at some point I had to admit to myself that what I was doing was nice, it was relevant, it was useful, but somehow there was a deeper issue that anything I did could not address. And this is what set me on the path to start to think about systems and systems change. So now I'm going to tell you a few stories to illustrate what I found so far and what also from research we know why we are not able to face the challenges that we have. So the first one is symptom fighting. And plastic, I think, is a very easy example to understand this because you've seen maybe kind of programs and projects to clean out plastic from the oceans. Actually, I think there's a Dutch startup that's really famous that does that. And it's great, right? I'm not saying leave the plastic in the oceans. But to give you an analogy, if your apartment was flooded, it was flooding, somebody left a tap open, your whole house, flat, completely flooded, would you go take a bucket and start emptying out the water? Is that the first thing you would do? No, you would go and you would close the tap, right? And somehow when it comes to complex challenges, like the fact that we have a linear economy and plastic pollution and so on, somehow we default to something that we call symptom fighting. Right? So we focus on the bucket, right? We go take the plastic out of the ocean, but who's working on making sure that there is no more plastic at all ending up in the ocean? So that is the change, the mindset shift that we think of when we say systems change. The next one, maybe some of you know this animal, it's called an agatode. They're massive. If you've ever been to Australia, you've probably seen them. They were brought to Australia last century on the hope, and I emphasize the hope, the belief perhaps, that they would fix a problem that they had. They had a pest on certain kinds of crops, right? So they were like, we're going to bring a toad. The toad is going to eat the beetle. That is going to solve our problem. And this is what we call linear thinking. And the problem with linear thinking is that, first of all, if you don't test your assumption, right? If you don't put the toad in front of the beetle and actually check that the interaction that you were hoping for is happening. And secondly, you forget completely that you're putting a new animal into an ecosystem. And an ecosystem is complex in its essence, right? It's not something that you can address linearly. Then what happens? Some of you might know. This toad, so not only did it not eat the beetle that it was supposed to eat, but it had no natural predators in Australia. So now they estimate there's about 1 billion of those specimens from the 100 that they imported last century in Australia. And they are completely desperate because they are also highly venomous. So that means that even if a natural predator, like a crocodile or however the native species from there is called, would eat an agatode, it would likely kill the crocodile. So it's a huge danger to local biodiversity. So what they're doing now is that you see mayors from Australian towns going on so-called killing tours. Like literally, they mobilize their citizens with clubs and things to go and kill as many of those as possible. And that's just one example. There's many of such stories, but that's an example of what linear thinking does if you think that you found a solution for something and you're just completely off. So that's another reason why we're unable to solve our problems. The third one is based on a story that I heard when I was on exchange in Peru. I spent about 6-7 months on student exchange in Lima, which was very insightful. And I had one class about Peruvian development. And a journalist came, an environmental journalist, and she told us about this government program. So you have to imagine that Peru is a little bit like France, very centralized. I cannot say about the Netherlands. Switzerland is much more decentralized. But in Peru, it's pretty much like that. Like you have government officials in Lima making policies for people they've never seen, they've never talked to. They don't understand their way of life. It's a completely different ecosystem in the rainforest, right? And they had a problem with the quality of the drinking water. So they had native communities, indigenous communities in the rainforest continuously having poor health because of the water that they were drinking. So these government officials in Lima thought, you know what, we're going to make a machine that's going to clean the water, it's going to be great, we're just going to ship it out and teach people how to use it. And this worked okay in most communities, but there were a few communities where this just did not work. And at some point they were like, what's the problem? They went there, they checked, the machine works, that cannot be it, so what is the problem? And they couldn't figure it out. And this journalist went there, spent a number of months there until really there was a relationship of trust with these people. And they started telling her about their cosmology, so their way of understanding the world. So just like Christianity has this picture that there's a hell below and a heaven above, for them, heaven was under the water. These were people that were living at the Amazon. They were putting their dead back into the water. And their cosmology was that when you die, if you lived a good life, you would end up in this paradise underwater. So suddenly shows up a white person and tells you that heaven is poisoned. It doesn't make any sense. So the point that I'm making here is that very often when we have this top-down type of solution drafting and trying to solve a problem without understanding what the people on the ground are going through, how they see the world, how they think, we will completely fail with our proposals. All right, next one. We still have a tendency, and I understand it's not our fault in the sense that everything teaches us about ego. Right? We have to be the best, we have to be the fastest, we have to be the smartest, we have to be this. Everything's a competition all the time. And I'm not saying there's no value in competition, necessarily, but if our goal is to stop climate change or ensure equity between genders or ensure, integration and inclusion of people from different backgrounds that have come to a specific place, why are we competing? Very often, we are actually shooting for the same goal, and rather than passing each other the ball, we're like a terrible soccer team, And I don't watch sports, but if two people in a soccer team would be continuously fighting for the ball, that surely would not be very good for the team, would it? So my sense is that very often we forget that we are on the same team. And again, it's not our fault in the sense that even funders, for those of you who have either a social enterprise or an NGO or ever had to compete for funding, no, funding is allocated in a competitive way. So the whole system incentivizes and reinforces this type of competition, even though I don't believe it is really what we need. And there's also something around ego with knowing what is my contribution and knowing what is my space to take and what is not my space to take. And to give you one example, I was once invited a couple years ago to speak at the UN General Assembly. They sent me this fancy letter, President of the UN General Assembly wants you to speak at this panel. And it was a panel on youth and climate change. And I think they sent me the invite late July, and it was for September for the SDG summit. And I was flying for a few days to New York to go speak about climate change, I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me. And I, of course it's nice. It's nice for the ego to be oh, I spoke at the UN General Assembly, fancy, right? It's something that you feel oh, I achieved something. But I had to be really honest with myself and say, I'm not the biggest climate expert. If the topic is climate and youth, there are many other young people who are more qualified than I am to speak on this topic. Sure, I could go and I could say something, It's not like I'm not saying I didn't deserve it or, anything of the sort. That's also a tendency of people who've been gendered as women. But really just very honestly, does it make sense for me, specifically me, to fly there for a few days and just have a very short panel on youth and climate? And my conclusion was no. And so I reached out to my network. I said, hey, I got this great invitation. I know many of you are really, really, competent and capable in this area, younger than me maybe even, so I can make space for someone who's younger. Who wants to go, right? So that's just one example of how if we think about the ecosystem, if we think that we are on the same team, if we think about the impact more than our own ego, that requires to make some small or bigger sacrifices from time to time, but I'm convinced that it's necessary to collectively have the impact that we want to have. All right, next one. Anyone can tell you about the apocalypse, right? Anyone has seen The Day After Tomorrow or some other terrible movie. Anyone can think how the floods will come and everything will freeze over or meteorites will rain down on the earth. We have plenty of pictures of things going wrong, what that looks like. But how many of you can really today, if I ask you right now, what is your vision for the future? What is your biggest dream for the planet? How could our society look like 10 years, 20, 30 years from now? How many of you could really paint me a picture? Could really say, yeah, there's going to be, food that's just going to grow in the streets, and we're all going to work only 10 hours a week because we have done this and this and that. And, who could really flesh out a very nice, complete picture of what this future could look like? I'm guessing not many of us. And there's a reason for that. Actually, there's a few reasons. A, we are trained not to be creative anymore in school since a very young age, right? When you ask a room full of kids, who's an artist? Everyone's like, me, I'm an artist. And then you ask a group of adults, who's an artist? You'll have maybe 2 or 3. So there's something about the decline of creativity as we grow older that is not just random, right? It's structural. And it's hard to stand up and say, this is my vision for the future. Because what happens when you do that, and you're the only one, or you're one of a few people, you get attacked, people try to humiliate you, to discredit you. It's happened to me a number of times. So it's not easy to be the one standing up and saying, hey, I think things can be different. And I don't mean it as an attack to you or what you're doing, but I think things can be different. And can we talk about that also? People very quickly get dismissive, aggressive, defensive, all sorts of things to kind of shut down that uncomfortable line of inquiry. So that's, from my analysis, another reason why we struggle to get where we want to go. So again, while some people have their plans, these people, not only do they have plans, we also know, and this is something that I'm taking from research, that your investment in the status quo, which can be your money, your identity, infrastructure, correlates with your resistance to change. Makes sense, right? If I've built my entire life in a certain industry, my entire success is based on a certain amount of premises, I will be reluctant if you show up and you tell me that what I did was maybe not ethical or needs to be done better starting tomorrow. I may fight you on that, or try to just make sure that it doesn't happen. And sometimes we forget to factor that in when we design our plans for change. So that's the 6th reason. All right, now systems change enters the chat. What does that mean? What are we talking about? And when people march with signs like this one, systems change, not climate change, what do they mean? Let's try to unpack it a little bit so we can kind of have a same picture of what we're talking about when we use the word systems change. Many people use this iceberg model as a way to understand it. And whenever you think of an issue, you could take anything. In your mind right now, an issue that you care about, whether that's plastic in the ocean like I described before, or the future of the education system, any issue that you care about, you can very quickly think about the results of the problem. You can think about this many people are going hungry, this many people are homeless, this many people are at risk of having bad or poor mental health situations, and so on and so forth. So the results, the manifestation of the deeper issue, probably you can tell me very quickly. Now, one level down, ask yourself, what are the structures, the processes, the rules, the law, the practices that make this result, that ensure that this result keeps happening and that it's not going to change? What laws exist, what norms exist that keeps this in place? For example, in the plastic case, you could say, well, that it's even legal to have single-use plastics, right? This is something that's been debated a lot in the EU recently, that maybe we shouldn't have such a thing. And then one level down, you can ask yourself, who creates those policies, those processes, those norms, those rules? Who created them, or creates them, or maintains them in place, doesn't change them? And here, typically, you will find, well, elected officials. And who are elected officials? Which demographics do they represent? Which ones do they not represent? Who are they funded by? And also, people who control capital. So typically from the private sector, wealthy families in some countries play a very relevant role. or big employers, and so on and so forth. And on the deepest level, what we are interested in is what are the mindsets, the values, the belief systems, the paradigms that these people, really all of us, but especially the people making the decisions, basing themselves in. Where are they coming from when they make policies and choices like this? When they refuse to change a certain policy? What's the motivation? What's the primary paradigm that they're coming from? And now we can overlay on this change work. So different types of change work. People who try to change things, how might they try to do that? If you address the symptoms, we call that direct service. And again, I'm not saying that we need to stop direct service, right? I'm not saying let the hungry go hungry while we solve hunger. Of course, we need to keep addressing the symptoms. On a deeper level, though, who's working on structural change? Who's trying to identify, well, if a certain amount of people are homeless, for example, here in Maastricht, I'm not sure if it's a topic, but you could think of any issue, who's not just fighting on the symptoms, but on actually addressing the structures and trying to see if we can change those. And if you try that and you realize that actually there are certain people resistant to change, blocking whatever it is you're suggesting because they have an interest in keeping it so, then you can think of working on personal transformation. How can I reach those people? How can a change happen within that person in that position of power so that they may change their decision or change their approach? And in the deepest level, we work on paradigm shifts. So this is what people who say they work on systems change, typically what they mean. They mean that they go beyond only direct service and work also on those deeper layers. I personally start preferring the tree as a picture, but really up to you. So what's a system? Donella Meadows, she was one of the people who co-wrote Limits to Growth, one of the first reports raising the alarm that unbridled exponential growth cannot happen on a finite planet, right? She was a great systems thinker, and she said it's an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. So if I just throw a couple stones on the floor, that's not a system, but a forest is a system. And you can find systems in the very, very nano, right? In the very, very small. A cell, in a way, is a system. A digestive tract is a system. A body, a whole body is a system, designated to keep me alive and here to do what I'm doing. But you can also see them in the very macro. You can say our democratic system is a system, our education system is a system, our solar system is a system, right? You get where I'm going. So I think it's important to say that changes in the system, so just managing to change one law or to include one younger person or one person of color in decision-making or whatever the case may be, is not per se a change in the paradigm. Those two things are not the same. You can make progress towards a vision that you hold. You can manage to make small changes here and there, but the end goal remains the paradigm shift. And this is where we often get off track, right? We start working on the small things. We're like, yeah, we succeeded, and there's one more person, and so on. But are we really changing the paradigm, or are we just keeping ourselves busy while, the people who don't actually want anything to change are happy that we only focus on this small little part? All right, so one example is, for example, shifting from a linear to a circular economy. That is an easy way to understand the paradigm shift, right? The paradigm in the linear is I take things from nature, I extract from nature, I make something from it, somebody uses it, and then we discard it, typically. And there's such a thing as waste, or maybe recycling. That's all part of a linear structure. In a circular structure, there is no such thing as waste. Everything I do is a component of the next action of somebody else. And really designing an economy in this way is not just going to be one law change or one politician who gets it or one CEO who decides to do it differently. It's going to be a much deeper change. Typically, when you look at the issue, so whatever issue it is that you've chosen in your mind so far, you find at the very, very bottom 3 divides that keep showing up. The first one is I'm separate from others. This is called the social divide. So this kind of justifies other people being treated worse than I'm being treated, right? They're far away, they're not from my country, they look different, they love differently. For some reason, I have the belief I am separate, and therefore how they are doing does not affect me. And the second divide is the ecological divide. This is the belief that we are separate from nature, which is pretty funny, considering that we live in symbiosis with trees, for example, right? They produce what we need to breathe, and what we produce is, in turn, their nutrient. And the third one is one we often don't talk about, I find, is called the spiritual divide. You could name it differently. It has nothing to do with religion per se. It's the realization that I am separate from myself. So this happens when I follow the script that was handed to me by my parents, by society, by my school, of what being a good human is, of what a successful life looks like, that I should marry this type of person, have this type of job, study this, do that, and that I do it, and then I realize, oh, I don't know who I am. And we used to call this the midlife crisis. I'm curious to see if in future generations it will hold up the same, because I do think, there's much more availability and information and different choices and freedoms you can kind of take for yourself. But still, this feeling separated from oneself is something that can happen very quickly when I'm out of alignment of my values. And I would say, living in modern society, many of us are probably out of alignment with our values on a daily basis, at least in some way, right? For example, I have a MacBook, I have a computer. I know that people die in mines in certain parts of the world for those computers, maybe not exactly for mine, and it's secondhand, and I can, make up a story to myself why that's better, but I'm still part of that system. I still have a share of the responsibility for that. And again, I'm also not saying, it's on us to change everything, because we cannot, but it's good to be aware. So this cultivation of being connected to myself is actually a key point to be able to change things. And we'll talk about that more. So I made a little storyline. Say somebody wants to change something. Where do you start? So from my point of view, you start with the vision, right? Because as I described before, if you don't have a vision, you don't know where you're going. You don't have something that motivates you, something that really gives you that North Star. Then say you develop a solution, whatever that solution is, a partial solution, a project, an attempt to make a change, and you hope that this will guide you to where you want to go, that this will have the effect that you envision that it has. Now, I think it's really important to ask yourself, what kind of change am I working towards? Is my solution a match to that change? So again, for example, if my goal is to end hunger by distributing meals, am I really making that much of a contribution towards that? Or maybe is my goal really to make sure that nobody goes hungry today? And then I can be very honest about that, right? So it's not about judging one or the other type of change work. It's more about saying, let's be honest about what we're really doing. The second thing is, did I do my research? And how deeply do I really understand the challenge? I think it's, good to be careful with anyone who learns about something on day one, and on day two they already have a startup and an app and an idea of how they're going to fix the whole thing, without, again, having talked to anybody that actually is affected by the challenge. Do I understand what others have tried or are currently doing in this field? So, okay, I discover, whatever, bee extinction is a huge problem in my context. Am I going to research what was already tried, what maybe failed in the past, what worked, what other people are already doing, or am I just going to launch my new NGO of bee saving in the Netherlands right into the middle of that field? That would make me a very good team player, would it? And have I oversimplified the challenge, like the agatode, right? So I hope whenever you think you have a perfect solution for something, as of this evening, you're going to have a little alarm bell. Am I doing the agatode thing? Did I just think, oh yeah, beetle is going to be eaten by the agatode, perfect. Just take a moment to check. Is it really that simple? And sometimes it is, I'm not saying it isn't, but very often it's not when we talk about social or environmental issues. Am I including stakeholders? If I'm trying to solve mortality and maternity in a specific country, have I talked to people from that country? You would be surprised the amount of white people I hear at conferences come up with the craziest ideas for challenges that they've never faced, in places that they've never been, affecting people that they've never even talked to. The importance also of having a vision is it allows us to see, is our vision shared? Because if it is, we can become aware that there are many partial solutions to a shared challenge and to get ourselves to a shared vision. It's not like just what I do, my intervention is going to solve gender equity, and I hope I'm aware of that if that's what I work on, right? I know that I can do my part, and maybe you do your part, and together we make a bigger difference than we did on our own. But we need to know this. We need to be able to do that, to articulate those differences and those synergies, to be able to collaborate and really make a difference together. And then, and this is also, I think, really important, is that we need to love the vision and the challenge. Let's say the challenge you're focusing on is a food system that's more sustainable, more than you love the solution that you're holding. Because if you love your solution more, you're going to be so invested in proving that your solution works, you might not even realize that it doesn't, right? Or you might just keep going with something when actually you could be focusing all of your energies on something that works much better. And we want to avoid that. And then to take that even so a step further, are you willing to abandon what you thought could be the solution if the data shows you it does not work? And if it works, if you've done your part of the contribution, say you campaigned a lot for food waste to stop here in Maastricht, and say you succeeded. You established, together with others, a scheme that there will be no more food waste at the entire university. Awesome. Are you willing to really solve the issue? Because there are people who are more invested, that's again the ego topic, in making their NGO eternal than in actually solving the problem. And that's also something, it can be hard to be honest with yourself about that. Am I more committed to actually solving the issue that I'm addressing, or am I really committed to making my NGO eternal? So I used to always say, my goal with Collaborat Helvetica and anything that I do is to make myself obsolete. If at some point it becomes a policy, it becomes available to everyone for free, it's scaled because suddenly it's in the hands of the government, and that's a success, even if that means that my NGO doesn't exist anymore. So that's just another question that's important to ask. So yeah, am I able to do that? To really say, I solved this part of the challenge, I'm moving on to the next bit. And then, have you considered resistance to change? I hear so many beautiful visions, beautiful ideas, and the people are hopeful and motivated, and then they go out and they think everyone's going to love their idea, and inevitably what happens? You will have people who are like, nope, don't want to do that, don't want to change this, thank you very much. And then if you haven't anticipated that, if you didn't prepare yourself mentally, strategically for people who will resist your ideas, then you get deflated and discouraged very quickly. So just to sum up, 1, make sure the solutions that we come up with are systems informed. 2, developing shared visions so that we can actually collaborate. 3, loving the challenge more than our specific partial solution or idea. Impact over ego. And 5, anticipate and address resistance to change. So this is just a little input for, I think all of us are change makers at the end of the day in our own different ways. Based on the bigger problems that I said before, linear thinking and so on and so forth, that maybe you can take with you and, have a look in your projects, in your work, if these apply or help you in any way. So I did think I would introduce to you a proper systems change strategy, so that not only you know now what is a system, when we say systems change, what do we mean, how can I try to make change that's a little bit more systemic, but really a strategy that is completely focused on systems change. Social innovation labs is what I focused on for the past 7 years, and also in my dissertation that I did at Cambridge University in the context of my master's recently. So social innovation labs are multi-stakeholder processes which convene affected parties and decision makers, build systemic understanding, and enable them to develop solutions together. So I'll just run through a few definitions, and then I'll tell you a story. I'll give you an example. So 4 characteristics, like I already said: social, bring the stakeholders together. 2, systemic, so we don't just come together to brainstorm how to tackle the symptoms. I think you get that point by now. 3, awareness-based. It requires everyone to think about how they're contributing to the challenge and what preconceived ideas, notions, judgments they may need to let go of to actually be open to change. And the 4th bit is, like in any lab, you make experiments, you test things, right? You iterate any solution that you come up with. The results can be social capital. It's a really important aspect. When you've brought together the actors of a system and there's more trust, that can change everything, right? If suddenly you have say the director of the university on speed dial and you can be like, hey, I think we should do this new initiative so it will be more sustainable, that changes the system. The human capital means that we have new capabilities. We know, for example, how to think systemically. We know how to collaborate, even though we are very different or even though we may disagree. That's key to be able to implement the solutions. We have new knowledge, new insights. We have new physical capital, so we maybe came up with solutions that are new spaces, new products, new services. And very often there's also financial capital that results, directly or indirectly, because we address an issue that was costing a lot of money to somebody, could be the government, could be private citizens or companies, and we are able to reduce the costs. Yeah, this is my academic representation of the theory of change, but I think I'm going to skip over that and we can go more into it tomorrow if you want. So here's a story of a social innovation lab in Brazil. This was a couple years ago, and the thing that motivated this social innovation lab was that they realized that in Brazil, they had the first generation that was doing less good, that was a terrible way to phrase that, but they were less healthy than their parents, which is pretty unique because normally in the progression of history, every generation is healthier than the last because we progress in medicine, we progress in so many things, right? And they found that the leading cause for that was the type of food that people were consuming. So they found a lot of food deserts, typically in favelas, as pictured here. And they found that foods that are, fast foods, high sugar, and so on, high fatty foods, are very readily available, but not so much foods that are healthy, like fresh produce. And faced with this challenge, what this person did in Brazil is that they tried to convene the stakeholders. So they thought, who are the stakeholders in this issue, right? And they think, well, scientists, experts for sure, people who live in favelas, absolutely, just citizens who are concerned about the topic, parents, people who work in schools, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, the big companies that have a leading market share in those beverages, and so on and so forth. And they took on the big task of trying to bring those stakeholders together. Now, you can probably imagine what Pepsi and Coca-Cola say when they're invited to come together with activists who are criticizing them for their policies. They were like, absolutely not. Why would I do that? And the activists, on the other hand, were like, why would we collaborate with Coca-Cola and Pepsi? They are the guilty ones. They're the bad ones. So that's a typical thing that you find in systemic issues, that there's a lot of polarization and finger pointing, right? You're the bad one, or you're the bad one, and people don't want to work together. So the first massive task of the people putting on the social innovation lab is actually talking to everybody to make sure that they agree to even meet, to even get in the same room. And that is already a huge accomplishment if you succeed in doing that. So they did, they managed. And they went through this process. They met 4 or 5 times over weekends. They went to favelas, they went to farms, they went to companies. They did all of this work together to better understand the system, how it is. So what happens in such a space is that you go from finger pointing, from I'm going to debate you because you're wrong, no, you're wrong, to as human beings, regardless if my label was Pepsi or activist, looking at the system together. So you kind of put the problem in the middle, so to speak, right? And together you look at the problem and you try to solve it. And when this happens, when, for example, there was one lady from Pepsi in this project, when she can move from having to defend herself constantly to just being able to be a part of a group that tries to solve a challenge, suddenly there's openness to change that wasn't there before. And she saw how her company directly contributed to this terrible situation in a way that she could no longer deny. She had to face it. And she went back to her employer, and she campaigned inside of this company until Pepsi and Coca-Cola together announced that they were withdrawing from schools where there are children under 12 years old with their sweet beverages. So basically a huge choice, right, of a company voluntarily giving up a market share because they realized that it's the right thing to do. And that was only possible because this person was so deeply touched and transformed. Remember my iceberg or tree, it's the personal transformation level, right? She was so transformed that she made a different choice. They also made, community gardens in favelas and tons of other projects, but I just think that this is really a nice illustration of what this strategy can do. Almost at the time. So how can we contribute to a paradigm shift? I just wanted to mention this because we are here at the university, and part of the conversation was also, well, what can we do here, right? Because I talked now about big concepts that you can study in theory, you can apply them to your work if you want, but let's kind of zoom in a little bit to us being here as potentially students, people active in a university context or in the context of this beautiful city that you have. So the levels of change upon which one can act is, of course, as a person, right? I can change myself, I can change my choices, I can change my behaviors, my values. As a team, the people that I work with that are closest to me, my organization, so in this case, the university, right? So seeing an event put on by such a broad collaboration of stakeholders, all who are engaged in similar, slightly different missions, to have a shared purpose and say, hey, what would be possible if we work together? I hope that this, continues into the future, or that's, for me at least, a good sign that there's a willingness to do things differently and to do them together. And then, on the broader context, the ecosystem, maybe the country, maybe the world. Now, of course, there's few of us who actually have the level of influence to directly change the world, or even directly change a country, right? There's very few people who have that. But the thing is, in my experience, wherever you start, your sphere of influence grows naturally. I started in my school. I was very upset that they wouldn't let me eat vegetarian food, so I campaigned for being allowed to eat vegetarian food. From there, I went to NGOs, and I worked with NGOs. From there to the UN, from there, right? So it's like your sphere of influence naturally grows. When people notice that you care, that you have skills, that you're willing to make a contribution, naturally you discover new roles, new collaborations, new opportunities, and your ability to create change and to have impact grows as you do that. And it happens naturally. It's not something that you need to specifically seek even necessarily, in my experience. But the other thing that's really important for me is what's represented here is a model that we came up with to try to put words to what some people now call the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals. Maybe you've heard of those. But it's pretty much the same. It's kind of pointing out that in order to do the outer work that we want to do, so the change-making work, the social innovation work, we need to do a certain degree of inner work as well. We need to challenge our own assumptions, our own blind spots. We need to maybe learn new skills, talk with people that we wouldn't normally talk with, right? There's a number of things that we need to do to be able to have the impact that we want to have. And this goes also for an organization like the university, I believe. So I believe, for example, an institution like this, if it's not serious about its own sustainability, about really being an environment where pioneers of the future can learn, can grow, can test things, can meet other people to work together with in the future, then it's not likely to be able to really make its contribution in the outer, right? So it's not going to be a leading university on a topic that's related to those things. Those things correlate, right? You need to be serious about embodying what it is you want to see in order to really do it authentically and impactfully in the outer world. So, this is a big one, to dare to challenge the narrative. I was with friends from the Netherlands over the weekends, and they told me that just like in Switzerland, also here, it's becoming really, really hard for young people to have any chance at owning a house at some point. The same is true in Switzerland. So I think we are in a pretty unique point in time where there's a story that's been sold to us, right? A story of trickle-down economics, of the American dream, of endless prosperity, of you just have to work hard and then you can have a car and a house and 5 children and a golden retriever. And we are just realizing that this narrative is breaking down on all sides, right? There's a pandemic coming in the middle, there's economic realities coming in the middle, there's wars coming in the middle, rising cost of living. So there's just a story that's been sold to us of what a good life is that's breaking down. And you can even see it that the people who succeed in that story have very often terrible mental health. There's a suicide rate amongst men of a certain age that made it, at least in Switzerland, that is tremendously high. So there's a point where all of this money and all of these objects and all of these resources do not actually contribute anymore to our happiness. It can even have the contrary effect after a certain level. So just to become aware that the narrative we were told doesn't apply anymore. You can throw it out the window. Now the little problem is that we don't yet have the new narrative, right? Like I was saying, we don't fully have a new vision. It's on us, on you, on each of us to write this new narrative. But to dare to say, you know what, okay, even if, you know, my grandparents would always tell me, so when are you going to do some real work? Like the NGO that I founded, the European Youth Parliament, all the things I did, to them is not serious work, right? Because they understand you're either an academic, a politician, you know, they understand these boxes, they don't understand what I do. And they love me and I love them, right? That's not the topic. But so just to say, look, thank you so much for your care and your concern, and I'm challenging this narrative, right? I'm challenging the narrative that we need to continuously work more to do better and all of those things that are adjacent to that. All right, so this was kind of the reminder. And to circle back to this topic of developed countries, if we know now that developed countries are actually not all that sustainable, are not reaching the SDGs, they're not even that equitable necessarily, they have huge consequences of our choices for other people elsewhere with the spillover effect. And most of our population is also not necessarily happy, right? There's a contrast between the story that we think we need to live and where we really are. So what does it mean to be developed? I held a TED talk at the Swiss Development, Corporation where I said, well, in my opinion, Switzerland is very much a developing country because clearly we have not figured out the answers, right? Clearly we haven't reached our goals. So what is this weird dichotomy that we're creating here? And then the other question that's relevant for me is, well, what is the responsibility and the role of Europe in this context? Of a country like the Netherlands, like Switzerland, a continent like Europe, a a collective project like the EU that Switzerland regrettably decided not to be a part of. That's my burden to carry. So to sum it up, what can I do? So I'm bringing it back again from, you know, big questions and systems and concepts back to, okay, me as an individual leaving this room tonight. If I want to do anything, what is it that I can do? And I would say that I cannot give you clear-cut, you know, answers, because that's part of this one-size-fits-all, linear, oversimplified narrative. What I can offer is good questions, I hope, I do think so, and lines of inquiry, you know, tips and advice. It's almost like signposts. You remember this slide I had with like the map and the vision of where we're going? It's almost like what I can share from what I've went through is maybe a little post, you know, a little signpost that I put up. I went this way and it pretty much works. You can try it out. And then if you go further, you can put your next signpost. So that's really what I can offer, not answers, just better questions. At the end of the day, it's about finding what is our unique contribution in this day of age, in those times that we are in now. What is relevant for me to do? What is relevant for us to do, for a university like the University of Maastricht to do? So I would start with getting clear on purpose, values, right, vision for the future, and striving to design a life that's aligned with them. And it's okay if it cannot be fully. Like I said, we live in systems that incentivize things that are not sustainable. Sometimes there's not even an alternative to unsustainable products, like in the computer example. But what can I do, right? So not focusing on what I cannot do, but focusing on what I can actually do, and really use that sphere of influence. The second thing was to become increasingly aware of the paradigm of thoughts underlying my action choices and the system I'm part of. So where do I notice myself in my thinking process coming from thinking that I'm separate from other people, or separate from nature, or separate from myself? And can I take responsibility for my privileges, my position in society, what I can change, what I cannot change? Dreaming big. So again, going back to the vision point, reflecting on the change work and the strategies. I think I've outlined a few things that you can reflect on, right? Are you focusing on impact? What level of the iceberg are you focusing on? These are all things that you can reflect about. And am I really collaborating with others? Am I including stakeholders? Am I making sure that there are diverse voices heard, or am I just preaching to the choir, symbolically? So that's what I said before. If you just do what you can in your sphere of influence, in my experience, it will naturally grow from there. And tomorrow we'll talk a lot more about ecosystem leadership, leadership in today's age. What does it mean to be a change maker? What kind of careers or contributions can I have knowing what I know now? So again, I come back to this concept of being in the creative tension between what I know reality is, what I know we could do together, the potential that we have. And to know that even when things are challenging, even when we think that we are in dark times, whether that's true or just our perception, daring to stand up with my vision, with what I think is possible, is so important. And if I do that, and you do that, and somebody else does that, we will remember that we're actually many. You know, the slide says, oh, I'm just one person, what can I do? Said 7-9 billion people. So this is the quote I like to end with. The future depends entirely on what each of us does every day. After all, a movement is just people moving. Thank you so much.
Nora, thank you so much for that confronting, perhaps hard-hitting, but ultimately really uplifting talk. You started at the beginning saying, well, there's so much going on in the world. Does it really feel right to talk about these things? But perhaps with so many things going on in the world, it would be wrong not to talk about them. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. To continue this conversation, we have a wonderful panel of members of the Maastricht University community, and I'd very much like to welcome them up here. Please, hey, Marvin, Shiren, where are you? First of all the way on well, your left, we have René Gabriels, teacher of philosophy, resident Marxist. Well, certainly my favorite Marxist at this university. I will not speak for others, but I will speak on my own behalf, working at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and of course also a fixture of Studium Generale, starting now his lecture series on the need for a revolution, which I'm sure many of you will want to attend. We also have with us today Marvin Reinhardt, who is a second-year student of biomedical sciences at the Faculty of Health Medicine and Life Sciences, and also a member of the FHML Green Team, where he works on, among other things, issues of sustainable food, which is clearly something that is really important and that Nora mentioned in her talk. And finally, oh, you're clicking. It's not me, it's you. Shiren Bektimir, of course, as assistant professor at the Maastricht Sustainability Institute, who specializes in issues of governance and sustainable development, coordinating the UM minor on sustainability, and wrote an excellent capstone many years ago on privacy. I remember it well. René, having heard Nora's talk, what were some of the things that sort of popped up in your mind?
Well, first of all, I must say it's a very inspiring and also very challenging talk. And, well, let's start with the challenging part of it. I think addressing all these issues that Nora addressed is, I think, very important and even became much more important in the last couple of years. But I think, well, if you talk about problems, and, well, one of the big problems is the climate catastrophe, but also the socioeconomic divide within countries, between countries, etc. And I think you should start as an academic with the diagnosis before you start with the therapy. But there was too much focus on the therapy and not enough focus on the diagnosis in Nora's talk, because she immediately at the end shifted to vision and solutions. And focusing much more on the what question. For instance, one answer to the what question is, what is the case? Well, the ecological footprint of the Netherlands is too high, also of Switzerland and many other countries, and also the how question. But I think as an academic, you should always ask why. Why is it as it is? Why is the ecological footprint of the Netherlands that high in comparison to many other countries, and not immediately going to the solution and the vision. And then I think the big elephant, not only in this room, is very simple, is capitalism. Capitalism is incompatible with sustainability. Capitalism is incompatible with making an end to the socio-economic divide. And capitalism is, the current form of capitalism, is incompatible with democracy. And we, as a critical scientist, you should ask yourself, to what extent does because Nora also addressed the university, contributes to that. Well, our university and many other universities are capitalist, sustaining capitalism, sustaining the socioeconomic divide, sustaining also the climate catastrophe. To give you only one indicator, so also in the beginning, the slides were addressing the so-called social development goals. Social development goals, the 2030 program, well, SDG number 8 is about economic growth. And what we're doing at this university and many other universities is addressing it. This university is an autocratically ruled university, not at all democratic, is sustaining the sustainable shit because they embrace the sustainable development goals. And the oxymoron is economic growth. So you have to discuss the economic system. And the system concept that is used by Nora is, to me, too much harmonic, because she used the, I noticed it here, the definition in interaction in system. It's an interaction self of elements that is coherently organized in a way that well, leads to certain actions or to certain goals. But the problem is it's not at all coherent. There are huge interest conflicts. And as long as you don't address these interest conflicts, you cannot make create a more sustainable, fair, and democratic world order.
Okay, and these are the internal contradictions of capitalism.
But yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nora, what do you think of capitalism?
Well, ka-chong. I think I did, it's not per se, I'm not the expert that you are, right? So I'm not an economist, so I don't pretend that I can stand here and say we need this other economic theory, but I think I did point out that, we have 1 or 0.1% who is trying to figure out how they exit this planet when they finished exploiting this one, and so on and so forth. And also the fact that, of course, the people who are most invested and benefiting the most from whatever the current system is will be the most resistant to change. And that, for me, ties completely in with what you're saying. And so I agree that there's a huge issue. I do not pertain to the people who, have studied, whether it's Kate Raworth or other kind of alternatives that try to make an incremental change, nor am I Marxist or somebody who can say, well, this other completely different paradigm would work so much better. That is not my position. But I share much of what you describe as being the analysis of the problem, absolutely. And on the kind of the definition of what a system is, just kind of coherently, I think I see what you mean. And I think the definition in that sense wasn't to say that it's all harmonious and everyone is a willing participant. It's just that we see that somehow things work. So what she was looking for, the person that I quoted, was a lot feedback loops, right? So who does something that then triggers somebody else that then triggers something else, and that can have a coherence without being planned, intentional, or even like something that we think should be done, right? So my core question remains, why are we creating results that most of us don't want? That's my key question. And I do think that I'm absolutely in agreement with you that we need to change our economic system for this to be possible, 100%.
Jiren, when you heard Nora's talk, what was front of mind for you?
Well, I think in terms when we talk about the diagnostics of the problem, I think we know quite a lot about what is actually not, I should move closer. All right. So I think we know very well what's actually wrong, and I think the growth model, as we have purported for decades, is not the model that's going to get us to reaching any of the goals that we have in relation to sustainable development goals or combating the climate crisis that we're facing. But having said that, I think it's also good to remain optimistic in the sense that we need to have a sense of agency in all of this. And I think that's very important to realize that we all do have agency, and it can be at different levels, and our intervention points to stay in the systems dynamics and systems thinking can be at different places. So wherever we are in society, whatever role we have, it could be in our function, our professional business, could be in our daily lives, in our family lives. There are always things that we can do and align ourselves with getting to the place where we need to be. And one thing I would like to add to this whole systems thinking is that you also used, I read it, the quote of Donella Meadows, and it was about the elements, of course. We have the flows, the interactions of those elements and how they connect, but there's also a sense of purpose and the goals of a system. And so we have to critically think about what purpose does this system serve? What is the goal? We can say we do one thing, but if the system's moving to another direction, then clearly those things are not aligned. So we have to think critically, whether it's the economic system we're talking about or not, but if we really want to maintain global warming to a degree that's livable for humans, for animals, for the planet in general, then I think we have to look at how do those interconnections connect and what can we change and what are the right leverage points for us all.
So Nora, what do you think are the right leverage points for us all? What level should we be aiming at?
What leverage point should we be aiming at? I mean, maybe first, because I think it's so important that you add that, and that's absolutely a part of what systems thinking and systems theory is all about, that we see when the things don't align anymore. And I think that's also what I meant when I said, look at the narrative, right? Look at the story. We are told our economic system leads to these and these things. That's the purpose of the economic system. Is it really performing what we want it to perform? Same diagnostic for the education system, right? I spoke about the reduce in critical thinking and the reduction in our creativity. So we say education system is for A, but is it really doing what we want it to do? So in all of those systems, this is exactly the question that we need to ask. And then when it comes to what are the leverage points we need to tackle, so my position is a little bit more looking at the different systems and the different topics that the people specialize in, right? So I train and support change makers who work on the education system, who work on gender, who work on the economic system, who work on migration and so on and so forth, and kind of applying just this way of looking at the problem to hopefully find new ways of challenging them. So I think when it comes to who to ask this question to, I think you need to ask the change makers who work on the specific topics. I know that if we want a long-term systems change, it will not be without changing the economic system 100%, changing education, because this is where whatever we are reproducing is given on to the next generation, and changing democracy. Because democracy is supposed to be where we find common solutions to our challenges, and it's currently not really able to do that at the pace at which we need those solutions to be found. So those are, for me, 3 critical systems to change.
Okay. We might come back to democracy in a second. But first, Marvin, what was your thoughts when you listened to Nora?
I personally found myself to be very inspired by your talk, because a lot of the things I've encountered in the past 1.5 years in which I have tried to advocate for mainly incorporating more plant-based foods in the university. And there has been a lot of situations where you get discouraged by the progress that is being made. It often feels like you're not going anywhere and the progress is not fast enough. And just realizing that when you're trying to tackle a system, it just takes time and it takes multiple ways of tackling the problem to get to a solution. And I've also encountered issues that you mentioned. So, for example, we're talking with the company that provides the food to the university, and often the argument we hear when we try to implement new plant-based foods is that they're a company, they want to make profit. But the big issue here is that biology and just fundamentally the climate cannot really be argued with. So it is nice, I understand that you want to make profit, but still we know it is necessary for us to have more plant-based foods to live sustainably. So then I understand you want to make profit, but still science says we need to do this. So that's why I can definitely see your point being valid.
So what advice would you, right? Because you are often sort of in these conversations where you bring people together who have these different viewpoints, like Marvin was just talking about, and you have, right, on the one hand, the activist saying, oh my God, we have to go to plant-based food and it's urgent and we need to do this now. And on the other hand, you have the manager of the company who says, yeah, well, we're a company and I get judged by how much money I make, and I think the best way of making money is by selling people hamburgers because, hey, that's what they want. Right? How do you get that conversation going?
Yeah. It's funny, when we came into the room, first I was like, oh, a church. And then my second thing was like, this looks like an X Factor kind of jury type of situation. Little did I know, this is what was going to happen. So I'm getting like a buzz here, a thumbs up there. No, I'm joking. But so for me, hearing you, I completely hear you. I've been in that fight or in that struggle as well. And what I would look at is there a way to bring somebody who has the power to force this company to just do it? Can you get to that person? So who's that person? Why is that person not choosing to do what's right by all obvious measures, so at least for sure sustainable and health-wise? And is there a way to reach that person? And what would be the way to reach that person? And sometimes it's appealing to their empathy, sometimes it's appealing to their ego. Oh, we would be the first university to make this great progress. Don't you want to be the one who leads us to the future or something? And then the person's like, oh yeah, actually, I fancy myself a sustainable leader, and then they agree. So that's one way, right? So that's looking at who's in the position of power and how can you reach that person to make another choice. And the other one is playing in the logic of the people you're talking to. So for example, if their mindset of this company, and they tell you even, not everyone is that, transparent about their true agenda. Usually they have another excuse. So this company is like, no, we need to make money, we need to make profit. Okay, thank you very much. What can I do that will match this need? So can I, for example, find a partnership with a new plant-based meat alternative startup? I happen to know the head of public affairs of Planted, if you want to make a deal with them. Mm-hmm. And you come and you bring, look, I have a sponsoring agreement with this particular organization, and actually it's going to cut your costs and you're going to make more profit, right? So sometimes there's a way to sell it in that way.
But then you're still working within the system. And I want to plea for a radical change of the system in which we live. So if you start to talk with the manager of a company now, well, you should recognize or consider that the managers of companies are also actors who are structurally forced to fight or compete with other companies to make as much profit as they can. So as long as we don't address these structural issues, we can talk about agency. It's important to talk about agency, but the agency is very often limited due to certain structures, power structures, etc. And it was really great that you addressed that a lot of people in your talk, you addressed that a lot of people are fighting against those who want to make a change, who do everything that is in their power to frustrate people who actually want to make a change, people who want to democratize things, people who want to create a really sustainable world. We had recently in the Netherlands fights in The Hague with Extinction Rebellion, because then you feel the force of the system to silence you, etc. And so, and I think also, by the way, you should have a right to be very pessimistic. I'm very, very pessimistic. And I embody the hope of the hopeless. Of course, I see it as my self-respect, although that I'm very pessimistic, to do whatever is in my power to make a change. And that's the hope of the hopeless. But there are no reasons to be optimistic. Each day, at least 130, 50 species vanish irreversibly worldwide. Every day, about 22,000 people die because of avoidable poverty. And that's all due to the externalization of the social, economic, and ecological cost to other parts of the world. And if we talk about system theory, we have to develop a very sophisticated system theory, which is much more encompassing the whole world and relating the economic system to the law system, to the political system, etc., and to have a very, very sophisticated diagnosis. But without a good diagnosis of the shit, poverty, destruction of the environment, we can never have a serious solution. And we should not get into the trap to come up very quickly with solution as the program, etc.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You're a professor here, right?
No, yeah, assistant professor, yes.
Assistant professor. So just on your point, because you said then you talk with the system. But you're an assistant professor, and you just said before this is an autocratic system, and it's not democratic, and it's a profit-making institution. So isn't that the same? Aren't you, by being an assistant professor here, also in dialogue with the system that you don't think should be fed and should continue?
Yes, and I mean, one aspect is the way how a university and a lot of semi-public institutions are run is based up in a new public management. That means you rule a university as if it is a company. Mm-hmm. And that is very perverse. That is, when I was a student, my fellow students were not competitors, but now my students that I teach every day, nearly every day, they are in a competition who will have access to the best master programs. The teachers among each other are also in competition. Who is the best teacher, who publishes the most? There's a rat race. And it leads to an increase of depressions, burnouts, etc. And that is all you can say, well, it's nice, you can work on yourself and agency, let's work, come together to fight against it. That's what I also do. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and that makes me pessimistic, nothing will change the system. We have a university council, etc. It means they suggest that it's democratic. It's not at all democratic. Because we run it. We are here.
I think she's got the point.
I totally hear you, and you choose to be here, right? So you choose to still be part of that system, to be an assistant professor in this case, because probably you think you can make a contribution, right, by being in this position, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you've got to get in to get out.
So, yeah, okay, so there you go. So in my understanding of systems change, there's if you imagine one system is currently dominant, and we agree needs to end, multiple systems actually, and there's a new system or a bunch of new systems that are being born or being developed, there is, from my understanding, at least three different kind of roles or ways that you can position yourself. You can be the kind of person who is completely focused on creating the new. Those are typically people who exit the system, they found an eco-village, they go live in a monastery, they found a new school, whatever. They're only focused on the new. They are not in conversation anymore with the dominant paradigm, older old system, how it used to be. And then there's people in the middle, people who try to mediate between the dying system and the new system. And I think this is what you, for example, are doing when you say, okay, I understand you're a capitalist company, you're for profit, you want to make profit, I still want to make progress on plant-based food, so I'm going to talk your language, right? So I'm not going to exit the system because you are this way, and whatever, create a vegan university next doors to the University of Maastricht, right? I'm going to try to move forward this university, even if I have to speak your language. And I think that's probably what you're doing too, in a way, if you disagree with many things about the construct of the university, but still try to find a way where you have the opportunity to have an impact in the middle of the system. And then there's a third category, and this is a tough job. It's the people who are like the death doulas of the old systems, people who accompany the ending of the paradigm the way it is, who take care of the people who will lose their jobs, who take care of the things that need to be done for something to end. Anyway, but all that to say that I think you were a little quick at dismissing his, effort for change, when from my understanding you have a similar position in the system. Which doesn't mean I disagree with your diagnostic.
Yes, you do what you can, but take, for instance, the Arab Spring. I mean, there are a lot of resistance movements we had in the past. I mean, I'm also a sociologist and doing research on poverty in the Netherlands, on food banks. And I'm writing a book on food banks in the Netherlands. Well, the food banks, initially, when they started in 2003 in the Netherlands, the goal and also reaction of politicians was, we will have to make an end to that. But we see only an increase of food banks in a very rich country as the Netherlands. How does that come? Because nowadays, dealing with poverty became an issue of charity, and I'm radically against charity because it continues an asymmetrical relationship between the giver and the receiver. It's very humiliating. And now we have a welfare worldwide, philanthropic capitalism, the Bill Gates and the Zuckerbergs who spend the money. So this is, a lot of help, also of NGOs, sustains the system, and the same the SDG program that this university embraces.
So that's always the challenge, right? The sort of the challenge that, or the dilemma that we face, whether we want to try to get the system to work and thereby perpetuate it, or if we try to break it down.
Yeah, we have to break it down.
But Jiren, you teach the mayor. Can I teach Jiren?
What?
Because I want to know what Jiren thinks about this, and especially because you teach the minor in sustainability.
Right.
Where I guess these are conversations that often come up with students.
Yes, they are. And even with a thing such as the minor, and coming up with the minor was supposed to be a UM-wide minor for all students to make sustainability and sustainable development studies accessible for all students. Now, even when designing this, we faced lots of institutional hurdles within this university as well. That's difficult. It doesn't fit into our program. But the credits are 5 ECTS, and we give 6.5, and all these silly things. You know, you have ideals, you have a vision of what it should be, and you face constant challenges. And I think what's very important, and that also transpired in your talk, is that you need to engage, you need to talk, you need to deliberate. And I think this is part of the process. There will always be, you will always, you know, it's nice to be idealist, it's good to be very critical, always, but then you face reality, and you need to deal with the daily stuff. So you get on, and you think, who do I need to talk to today? What do I need to accomplish to get where I want to be? And sure, it will give you headaches, no doubt, but hopefully within an X amount of months, years, you will have hopefully accomplished what you wanted to accomplish. So I think, this deliberative process, and as someone who stands for sustainability and for sustainable development, I think it's very crucial to realize that you will have to always engage with others, also those who do not think like you.
One point I would like to mention is you previously criticized the fact that even working with a company that is in that capitalistic system would be bad because you're then still in that system. But do you not think specifically when it comes to climate change that there's just not enough time to wait for the system to change away from capitalism to then act? Because I feel like we need to accept that this is the current system and then work within that system and maximize our impact.
You're right, of course, there's a dilemma, so I don't want to say that sharp, so it's very good that you talk with these companies, but there is a serious dilemma, therefore I mentioned the food banks, because the goal of food banks is not only socio-economically, but also ecological. Because 30–40% of the food that we all can consume every day at all Dutch groceries will be destroyed. That's a waste of food. So the food banks are fight against waste, ecological issue, and the goal is reducing poverty. Well, I think it sustains the system because you don't do something on the roots, what you mentioned, or the real causes, but you're right. In the meanwhile, these people need some food. So we have 3 food banks in Maastricht. Well, one also of students, but that's not a serious one. But the other 3 food banks, these people need food. And before you have the revolution that I'm longing for, well, they can wait. Then you can wait for 30 years, maybe. And I think capitalism will come to an end. But the way it will come to an end, I hope I can do. At least I will do everything to avoid it. Will be very violent. Because it is already violent. It is very violent. With nature and other human beings.
Are there any questions from the audience? Oh, we have one over here. Let me come right up. Oh, there we go. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much. Generally, also thank you very much for the very lively demonstration of intermediation, like a few moments ago. Generally, I'm a very optimist person, though after hearing your speech, which I enjoyed a lot, I'm not sure I'm in more positive mood than I entered the room. Anyway, I have a naive question, basically. How many Noras do we need? That's one. Like, do we need thousands? Do we need millions? Do we need billions? What's the scale here? And the other question is, do you have a bucket list?
Okay, thank you. I think leaving a little bit more puzzled than you came or with more questions is typically a sign that I've done a good job. Because if people would leave the room and think, I figured it all out, I know exactly what we need to do to save the entire planet, then I would have oversimplified, right? I would have sold a fake narrative, a fake truth, and that's not what I can offer. So that's usually when people tell me this, like, oh, I'm leaving with more questions, I'm like, good. That means I was honest, and I did try to transmit complexity theory and systems change in a hopefully digestible way, but still honoring what it is at its core. And then, how many Noras do we need? I would rather say that we need all of us to really kind of grab that fire that burns deep within us, whatever it is, on whatever topic it is focused on, or whoever we wish to support, and really make that come to life. So I don't think we need to multiply Noras. I think we need to multiply whoever, your name and everyone in the room, kind of dial the volume all the way up on how bold we are, how authentic we are, how much we dare speak up for what we really believe in, reach out to the people that we, care about and want to connect with. That's my sense, right? So we all have a unique contribution to make. That's something that I'm really convinced of, and it's about kind of dusting off the, spider webs and things off of that and be like, okay, what's that contribution? What does it look like? And can I shine it a bit brighter, even though it's maybe scary? And whether I have a bucket list, I think somewhere. I tend to write in many journals and then lose the journals. So I have actually a to-do in my to-do list to make a new one because I couldn't find it anymore. So thank you for that reminder.
But then maybe on the topic of bucket lists, what would you regard as your greatest success so far? Where you really thought, okay, here, this is something that reinforces my belief that this can work.
I find it a difficult answer, or a difficult thing to answer, because I feel like I learned always so much more through my failures than through my successes. Things going wrong, realizing that, I didn't think of something, I didn't think that through, my knowledge was limited, I was, maybe a bit naive in how I approached something, and then I get kind of a bit hit in the face by the universe. Those were the moments that I learned the most from, and that I find to be the most interesting. But maybe a success, I ended up last year, for all my big talk about, practicing what we preach and being the change and walking the talk and so on, I ended up in a burnout last year, or I was probably for a while and was just diagnosed last year. And for me, I think probably it's been at least one of the biggest challenges I've faced. And so therefore probably also one of my biggest successes, to be able to come back from that and take my responsibilities towards myself, to be able to hopefully today show up in a better way, because I'm exploiting myself a little less along the way.
And that's also your remark about sort of being in harmony with yourself.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? Oh, one at the back coming right up. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. You talked about facing difficulties and difficult times, and you also talked a lot about responsibilities. And I can say for myself that I'm at the moment struggling to identify, to find out, how can I build my responsibilities? How can I find what my impact can be based on my strength and also my weaknesses? And do you have any, let's say, tips or anything you would like to maybe give me to identify these responsibilities? Because I feel we're so overstimulated each day by all kinds of information and all kinds of possibilities, what we could do, that sometimes this triggers that you just feel stuck. and you don't know what to do because there's so much you could do. But what will you end up doing? Nothing, kind of. But thank you in advance. It was really inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question. Are you coming tomorrow? Maybe. Then if you come, because of course, yes, I think like speaking of purpose and this sense of true potential is one of my favorite things to do, like helping, or not helping, but like being, you know, an ally and supportive to people, figuring out a little bit more, what is that treasure within me, and or that fire, and how can I bring it into the world? It's, I think, one of my biggest passions. So we were anyway going to talk about topics related to this tomorrow night, but I'm happy to include, like, in the design for tomorrow's evening, we can do a session on purpose. Like, there's a bunch of models. There's a Japanese one called Ikigai. One simple one that I like to work with is really simple. If you're not coming tomorrow, you can try this at home. The first quadrant is your values. Try to brainstorm first and then identify maybe the 3 biggest one. The second one is things you care about, causes, like whatever, you know, resonates more with you for whatever reason, without judging, just, oh, this appeals to me more, this calls me more. The third one is your passions, things you're super passionate about, and this can be anything. It can be knitting, it can be learning new languages, really, like, you know, really thinking very, very broad about this. And then the fourth one is your strengths. And at the intersection of your values, your passions, your strengths, and the causes that you care about, we can usually find some very creative and beautiful and inspiring kind of combinations of what your unique contribution could be. So I'm happy to do that with you tomorrow if you want to come.
Which is good advertising, right? Also for other people who are looking for their purpose.
So I have 2 questions. First one, to maybe build up what was already said. You were mentioning solutions and that people, you know, you have different pathways, everybody has a different plan, etc. And that plan has different steps of what you have to go through. From your experience, where do you where do you see people fail, or which part do you see people underestimate and thus leading into a harder process towards their goal or total failure?
In their attempt to make their contribution. Well, I think that what I've mentioned, what I mentioned here, so failing to really understand the issue, really talk to the stakeholders, include the stakeholders, a lack of anticipation of the resistance, right? So what we talked about before, that people have different agendas, different interests, and if I haven't spent enough time listening to the system and listening to the different people, I can be really taken by surprise when somebody's like, absolutely not, I will not do this with you, right? When I thought we are on the same page. Those are, I think, some of the major things. Others can then relate more to, well, not being humble enough, right? Like maybe having 2 big goals, a too big ambition of like, I'm going to be the one to solve this alone or with my own brand or my own NGO. And then, of course, this doesn't work out, or this pushes people away who would otherwise support you. And related to that, maybe also the mental health or just health in general aspect. Like I see many people trying so hard to make a difference, and like I did, but I see many others who do that too, and end up burning themselves out in the process. And there's just a moment where we need to see that we will not be of any use in the causes we care about if we have no more life energy to give. These are some of the biggest ones that come up right now, but also happy to think about this and come up with it again tomorrow evening if you want to join.
And now for the second question. So just to refer back to circular structure, as we were talking about basically taking things and then returning them back to the nature. What is your opinion on the rising laboratory-produced solutions such as GMOs, for example?
I think that's a good question, maybe for our sustainability expert over there. I'm happy to go first, and maybe you can share. Or yes. You want to start? Yeah.
Maybe. What was the first part of your question? I heard GMOs part, and I have an idea about it, but what was the first sentence?
Yeah, maybe also I should have added that this may probably a good open question for the whole X-Factor board, if I may call it that, sorry.
Yes.
Considering the circular structure, so basically we take something from nature and then after being done with it in a way, we return it back without actually damaging it. What's the opinion on the rising laboratory procedure solutions? So GMOs, for example, we got synthetic biology, xenobiology, etc.
Well, they
So
can.
the more technology hypothesis, right? That the solution lies in more technology, better labs, better equipment, better technology.
Yeah, the technical fix to solve all our problems. Well, I think it would be fantastic if there would be technical fixes that wouldn't mess with the system as we have it now, and that could solve all our problems. I think lots of capitalistic societies are betting on this to happen, also with the newly adopted funds that they want to make available, for instance, for developing countries, for those who need dire assistance in need for adaptation for climate change, also for mitigation for climate change. But I think it's a very dangerous sort of thinking that could not lead to change that we need to make today. Because if we invest in hopes for technological fixes that will be invented tomorrow, we're not investing in changing what we can change today. So I would say, let's look at what we can do now. And I think it goes back also to this, what Nora also mentioned in her presentation earlier, this linear thinking that got us to the place where we are, and that we can have easy solutions that will not hurt us in one way or another. I think we have to look deeper, be more reflective, and I think the more natural and solutions that are, for instance, more equitable, that connect us more to nature and more to our inner selves are much better than those that separate us from that.
And I see you going, yeah, you agree?
Yeah, well, I agree, yes. I mean, a lot of people even believe also nowadays in the Dutch election debates that technology is the solution. Well, that's not the case. You should take a lot of other measures. Well, and there are alternative models. There are also for the growth model, capitalist growth model, and that is degrowth models or post-growth models, and we have to work also on such solutions. It's not only a technological issue.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe just as a final point, Marvin, I mean, you seem to want to be this kind of change maker.
Yes, definitely.
What will you take from this conversation? How will you approach your conversation with the greedy catering manager differently because of what we talked about today?
I think a good first point is trying to figure out who pays these people, and then maybe an option would be to come from like a higher perspective. So whoever is in charge of these people, going to find out who that is, and then maybe to be able to put pressure from like somebody that they might actually listen to. And also just continuing the advocating I'm doing so far, so not being discouraged by setbacks and just continuing the effort and trying to get that snowball effect going where you yourself try to influence others to do the same, and then just have more people united with the same goal. So I think that is my main takeaway.
Good summary, Nora?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Maybe the last thing that comes up for me is also that those issues are so complex, right? And there's so many of them. I mean, somebody mentioned it, right? Like there's so many causes, so many things that are flaring up all over the globe. And I think it's really important that we do talk about it, we have discourse about it, we engage with it, and we really take it seriously, right? We don't just like gloss over and feel good about ourselves because we spent an evening talking a little bit about systems change, but really sit with it and face it, and then also allow plurality as a next step, right? So continue to be gentle with ourselves and each other as we all navigate broken, collapsing systems or systems that should have been changed a long time ago and simply have not yet been changed. And B, the fact that we all have different contributions to make. The fact that we have different expertise, different points of view, different life experience that will maybe make me personally care more about one issue than another one. And I feel like sometimes we spend a lot of time playing kind of suffering Olympics, or I'm the better change maker than you are, or my cause is more important than your cause. And this kind of goes back to my point about being aware that this is an ecosystem, and we are many, and we need all of us to find what is that thing or those things that I can contribute from the different sides, right? So we're all with our little maps, walking perhaps hopefully towards the same mountain, more or less, but kind of honor that also, right? And sometimes I can see and love and celebrate people for what they're doing, knowing that I could never do that. I could never be a humanitarian doctor on the field of some crisis, right? I would faint in 2 seconds. That's not my contribution. I'm not going to be the one inventing a new economic system, at least I don't think so for now. So I love and celebrate those who do get to do that, right? So have kind of a reverence and a respect for everyone, where they are in their journey and what they're able to contribute right now. And say yes and support people more often than criticizing what they do. So discourse is important, and just another votum to have that plurality, that systemic view when it comes to how we can address those challenges collectively.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful way to conclude. Nora, there's something coming tomorrow, right?
Something happening
What's
tomorrow.
the plan for tomorrow? Just give them the pitch quickly.
Do you want to, Daniel? The in-between? I should? Okay. Yeah, so we just figured, you know, if we're doing this anyway, sometimes when I speak in front of a big group, then there's many questions, and people have very different questions, and it's impossible to, you know, address them all kind of on the way out through the door. And especially when it comes to being with really anybody, but specifically young people who have big choices to make in the years to come about the trajectory that you will choose. If there's something that I can do to contribute in that moment in time, then I'm so happy to do that. So the idea was just to create a container tomorrow that's a little bit smaller. I mean, if you all show up, we'll make do and it's going to be wonderful. But yeah, the idea is like people who want to dive a little bit deeper. We talked a lot about big concepts, big models, the application of those models in practice, on your challenges, on your causes, on what you work on. And also really this topic of what's my unique contribution? What does it mean to be a leader that is ecosystemic, or whatever we want to call it, right, in this day and age?
Well, I think many of us will be really interested in that. May I thank our panel, René, Tiren, Marvin, thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts. And Nora, obviously, thank you so much for being here with us and sharing what you have to give. My great hero, the American composer Stephen Sondheim, at some point has Little Red Riding Hood say, "Isn't it nice to know a lot and a little bit not?" And maybe that is the reality that we all have to face. That, you know, but I also think that, well, as we go out into the dark night, and it is dark and it is windy and it is cold, that maybe we can bring with us a little bit of the knowledge and the insight, and above all the temperament that you gave us today, and feel just a little bit like a candle in the darkness that lights a little corner of the dark.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.